All right. Good morning, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome. I think the temperature is already pretty warm. It's a little cooler in here, thankfully. So a very warm welcome to all of you. Those who live here in Israel, and of course, an even warmer welcome to those who have traveled from far away, from the US, from Russia, from other places in Europe and beyond. This happens to be the fifth event which the Munich Security Conference has organized together with Deutsche Telekom, specifically on issues of cybersecurity. Our first couple of events were located in Bonn, where Telekom is headquartered, and then we became a little more ambitious, and we organized what turned out to be a really successful and interesting event at Stanford University last year in September of 2016. And I'm very, very happy, both for a political and for strategic and also for technological reasons, that we've been able to put this event together here in Tel Aviv. If our ambition is to bring the Munich Security Conference, as far as cybersecurity is concerned, to the places, where the action is, then clearly here in Israel, there's lots of action. In particular, of course, in terms of research and development and innovation. So I'm really happy. I read in the newspaper this morning that a senior White House representative who spoke during the Cyberweek here in Israel over the last couple of days called the cyber challenge one of the biggest strategic challenges since 9/11. And I wouldn't disagree with that, and I imagine that most of you, experts from various areas dealing with the cyber challenges, from the business side, from the intelligence community, from the military, or from the diplomatic front, I'm sure you would agree. So as we open this conference, let me just offer one thought. As a trained diplomat, I was taught that there is a distinction between war and peace. There's peace, then there is war. And for example, in the context of NATO, we've been discussing Article 5, which sort of unleashes the solidarity of allies who believe that they are under attack. It's been my impression that in the area where we're talking about, the borderline between war and peace is less and less clearly visible. And even if we don't want to speak of being at war on cyber, I think it is not wrong to say that we're probably permanently under attack. We're probably permanently under attack. And whether you call that war or not is a secondary question. But I think it's very important that we understand this distinction between the classical challenges of conventional or unconventional conflict to the situation that we're dealing with here today. Before I hand over to my fellow hosts, co-hosts, let me thank our partners, without whose support this event would not have been possible. I want to thank in particular the Blavatnik Interdisciplinary Cyber Research Center here at Tel Aviv University. I want to thank the Prime Ministers National Prime Minister's Office, National Cyber Directorate, and I want, last not least, of course, thank Thomas Krämer and his team from Deutsche Telekom for being yet again a fantastic partner in organizing these events. We want to continue this, and I want to share with you that we are currently discussing plans for next year. I think we will probably be able to do what we want to do, namely organize next year's Munich Security Conference cyber event in Tallinn. Minister Mixer is right here sitting in the first row. We were just talking about the conditionalities and how to do it and how to do it best. So that's the plan, and make a note of it, and we'll be in touch as soon as things have become a little more concrete. Finally, please do Twitter if you want to. This event, beginning now, is on the record. If you want to share whatever you think about this, don't hesitate. We had this intelligence roundtable earlier this morning, which was totally off the record, but as of now, this is open, and the media are invited to report about it. So let me now introduce the following welcoming speakers. The first one will be Professor Isaac Ben Israel, the director of the Blavatnik Interdisciplinary Research Center here at Tel Aviv University. His remarks will be followed by Thomas Krämer, member of the board of Deutsche Telekom. And then, last not least, we will hear from Eviatar Matania, the Director General of the Israel National Cyber Directorate in the Prime Minister's Office. So, once again, welcome to all of you. I'm very proud to be here and to participate in what I think is a really important and interesting event with such a significant number of outstanding experts from all sorts of areas of competence. Thank you very much, and enjoy the day.
Thank you all. I welcome you coming to this MSc conference, which is one event in full Cyberweek. And it's the first time in my life, I think. I started studying physics and mathematics at Tel Aviv University exactly 50 years ago. It's the first time in my life in which I think I really understand what it is to be an entangled quantum electron. Having to be in 3-4 places simultaneously, and this is something, after 50 is an achievement. We are speaking about cybersecurity, and I'm very glad that MSc, which is an old institution, chose to add cyber aspect to security problems all over the world. It goes without saying almost that cyber security or cyber threat generally is not only about technology. I mean, I personally deal with cyber technology in this way or that way for 25 years now. If I may summarize it in one sentence, it will be that although the problems, cyber problems, usually have technological solutions, the problems are never technological. If you don't take into account psychology of people, social behavior, legal problems, business considerations, political aspects, you don't really understand the problem. And if you don't understand the problem, you don't know what technology is really desired. And therefore, I'm very glad to discuss those other aspects of cyber technology concerning security here in this meeting. I hope it will not be the. I heard that last year you said you had it in Stanford. Okay, I hope you will continue improving. And I guess it will be not the last time that we participate in such an event. Thank you very much, and please go all to some other events after you finish the discussions here. Thank you.
Dear Ambassador Ischinger, dear Professor Ben Israel, dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome also from my part from Deutsche Telekom. Ambassador Ischinger mentioned already that this is the 5th time, and when I recollect 2012, when we met the first time, it was completely a trial. We were not so sure whether this would be a success to discuss the issues. But now, looking at all of you, looking at all the discussions we have, it was the right choice. It's nearly a tradition, and we certainly will continue. And dear Professor Ben Israel, also many thanks to you. We are proud to co-host the Cybersecurity Summit in Israel. Israel and the Tel Aviv University have an outstanding reputation, especially regarding innovation in the cybersecurity area. We as Deutsche Telekom are partnering with lots of companies in Israel in the cybersecurity area, and we have close contacts with the startup scene. We are here more than 10 years to look what is really happening in Israel, and this is really outstanding. Ladies and gentlemen, nowadays there is no longer a conflict between states which is not also carried out in cyberspace. Fake news, internet propaganda, and cyber attacks are the means you all know. Terrorists are using the cyberspace for recruiting purposes and for coordinating attacks. Cybercrime is growing, and cyber attacks performed by criminals are on a now very high professional level. One thing is for sure, cyber attacks don't stop at national borders. Defending our critical infrastructure, our computers, our systems, and even our societies is nothing that we can do alone. We need cross-border cooperation to cope with this challenge. Cyber attacks are still an underestimated threat. That's why international agreements on standards and regulations for cyberspace are simply overdue. We should not accept that the rule of law doesn't apply in cyberspace. But this is only one side of the coin. We also need a fundamental shift in the way we create software. Security has to become one of the more important parts of the development process for software, which is much more important than today, especially when we talk about critical infrastructures, but this will be a specific topic for a discussion round. In a digital world, our whole living standard depends on the security of our critical infrastructure. Think about electricity, water, or telecommunication networks. To make it crystal clear, we must not wait until a digital catastrophe actually happens. We need to act now, and that's why we are here. I hope we have a wonderful conference. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Cyber is a phenomena. It's not just a threat. And as a phenomena, I usually compare it to the Industrial Revolution. I believe that the cyber revolution is going to change our life totally, the same as the Industrial Revolution did. And our economy, our society, everything that we know is going to be changed according to the cyber phenomena. The total connectivity, the capabilities of computers, they generate a new phenomena which affects us. And yes, because it affects us, we also need to see what we are going to do regarding the security of our computer systems, and that's why cybersecurity is so important. Because with no security, we are not going to use and really prosper and change our economy and our lives. Cybersecurity is a necessity. Cybersecurity is an enabler of our future. That's the way we see it. And cybersecurity is not just technology, as was mentioned here. Cybersecurity has to do a lot about strategies, has to do a lot about policies, and we have a lot of questions which currently, I think that we are not yet in the position to know exactly how to answer. What is cyber deterrence, for example? And when we talk about cyber, is it the same to deal with cybersecurity when we are talking about crime, about terror, about cyber war? What are the differences? This is a phenomenon which affects us in all these aspects. What we were used to do, it was mentioned here again, what we used to do, there were peace times, war times, it is changing. It is changing, but cyber is growing from the tactical issues into the strategic issues, from just very small, low-level crime to terror, and then it's going to change the way that we know wars. We are just in the beginning of understanding all this, and we welcome always everyone who is ready to contribute to the discussions, to understanding better how we need and what we need to do in the Western world in order to be in a much better place to really keep our democracies, our human rights, and everything that you know about our lives in order to be in a better position in the future, in 5 and 10 years, when the cyber phenomena is going to affect us all, and we are going to live in a totally connected world. So I welcome you all. I hope there will be here interesting discussions as we have all around this week with other 50 events that we have here. Welcome you all and have a fruitful day. Thank you.
So the next 90 minutes we have here together are about the tough questions. We are going to discuss how cyber weapons affect global stability and what we can learn from the nuclear age for the cyber age. Wolfgang has said it for quite a while. Cyber made it to almost no conference. Munich Security Conference was the first mover with 5 conferences now. But I think it's fair to say that cyber is now front and center of almost every strategic dialogue. But what troubles me personally most is that we have already identified a lot of very good questions and pressing issues, but that we have only a very few good answers. So I want to raise at the beginning only a few of them. What constitutes an act of war? Is hacking a uranium enrichment facility in Iran and destroying it a physical attack or not? Is stealing data from a political party regular espionage as we have seen it? Or is it an act of aggression if you leak such data to the public? how can an enemy be deterred if we don't know what the capability of a cyber weapon really is? The military usually says, if you don't know it exists, it doesn't scare you. And what happens if those cyber weapons, if we have most probably have seen it, were developed by state security agencies with taxpayers' dollars and then stolen and used by an adversary, as it happened with the WannaCry attack and last night again. I'm thinking the internet is less and less Spotify, it's more and more WannaCry. I would argue that we have a real lack of a meaningful dialogue, something which has served us pretty well during the Cold War, a meaningful dialogue about arms control, protection, and a legal framework. Because traditionally, the race between armor and the bullet was always won by the bullet. So with all the tough questions here, I'm glad that we have such an outstanding panel, because I hope that you have the answers to the questions I have, because I don't have the answers. And I want to introduce my panelists. Jeanette Manfra, she's Acting Deputy Undersecretary for Cybersecurity and Communications at the Department of Homeland Security, United States of America. And if you would go first, Jeanette. I have one question for you, and then you have probably your general remarks. Michael Hayden, who is well known to almost everybody here and who is a regular at the Munich Security Conference, has said that we don't have this meaningful strategic dialogue because it's so complicated in the area of cyber, because it has its roots in the intelligence world. And the intelligent world neither likes rules nor any public debates. Would you share this view?
Well, I guess first I'm not sure I would agree that there is not a strategic dialogue happening right now. Whether the influence of much of what we're dealing with now having come from our intelligence communities or the defense communities is, of course, an issue that we need to address, but much of what we're also dealing with also comes from the private sector and is completely public. And so as far as grand strategies, I can't suggest that I'm an expert in developing grand strategies, nor am I completely sure that they are always necessary and useful. But what I do think that we need to look at is cyber, in one sense, is unique and very different, fundamentally so, from any other mission area that we've all been exposed to. But it is also, I think, a part of everything that we have all dealt with and our societies have dealt with for centuries. So it's still crime, it's still sabotage, it's still espionage, it's still preparation for wartime and conduct of wartime. These are all supporting capabilities for both states as well as criminal organizations and non-state actors. The large difference, I think, and the main challenges that we need to confront in developing, say, an international framework and domestic frameworks for how states use cyberspace is you have, I think, two, from a state perspective, two very important missions. And one is how you leverage cyberspace to protect your national security, to protect your homeland, to defend your homeland. And so leveraging cyberspace and everything that our connected world has to offer, and how do we build those capabilities appropriately. On the other hand, we also want to preserve the internet in that connected world and ensure that it remains a free and open, interoperable and secure and safe space. So how do states how are states able to balance those equities and those priorities? And importantly, and this is where I believe it's fundamentally different, the role of citizens and the private sector and the global community in particularly the latter, in defending and protecting the secure, open, interoperable internet that we all have become dependent upon. And that is what I think states are wrestling with. I know in the United States that is what we are looking at, and in partnership with our allies and other countries is how do we best balance those, because we're all interested in a secure and stable cyberspace, and we have to recognize that and learn lessons from other mission areas. How do we apply those, whether it's counterterrorism, whether it's what we learned through the nuclear age, but how do we also recognize what is different, and how do we build the frameworks internationally and domestically to achieve those?
Thank you. Our next panelist is Oleg Kramov. Доброе утро. Oleg, I have one question for you before your general remarks. Many in the West are convinced that the Russian president, former agent of your intelligence services, has modernized the old game of disinformation and active measures, which he has repeatedly denied. Please give us your take on all this, and if I may add this question, is trying to influence a foreign election an act of aggression in your view? And I would need a headphone.
Спасибо за этот вопрос.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Госпожа Джанет очень качественно и конкретно расставила приоритеты в деятельности государств, как нам показалось.
I believe that Ms. Manfra has given a very insightful overview of states' priorities on this issue.
Государство никуда не делось, мир продолжает состоять из государств.
The states are here to stay, and the world still consists of state nations.
Вопрос о правовом статусе государств, об правовом статусе внутри государств, о правовом статусе международного сотрудничества проработан в прежние века очень подробно и конкретно нашими предшественниками.
The problems of states' legal status, of states' internal domestic status, and the problems of international cooperations have been tackled over the centuries very thoroughly.
Вопрос совершенствования международных форм взаимодействия на основе норм права – это вопрос, который, на наш взгляд, кажется для всех очевидным.
As for improvement of international legal framework based on legal aspects, I believe that it is obvious that is a question we need to tackle.
Если комментировать вопросы, которые по-разному у нас называются, можно сказать, так как вы сформулировали, можно сказать, как нападки в адрес российского руководства. По-любому это имеет право на жизнь, но объективность, она над этим правом, как мне кажется.
As for your question, which may be formulated as you have done it, or which may be interpreted as an attack on Russian leadership, well, they remain the questions, and the reality is above that.
Никто не отнял у Российской Федерации право осуществлять разъяснение своей политики на международной арене всеми доступными для нее способами.
Russia still has the right to explain its policy on the international level using any means it has.
И если сейчас мы говорим о проблемах киберпространства, у нас есть встречный вопрос. А почему мы сюда сразу же примешиваем фейковые новости в привязке к деятельности средств массовой информации? Это уже борьба в другой сфере.
Now we're talking about cyberspace, and I have a question here. Why are we talking about fake news when talking about media? I think it's an issue of a different area.
Вопрос дальнейшего существования человечества заботит нас всех.
We are all very concerned about the future coexistence of the humankind.
Взаимодействие между государствами, как на уровне Организации Объединенных Наций, в общечеловеческом пространстве, так и между государствами приведет нас к искомому необходимому достижению. Нам при этом нужно ориентироваться на то, что мы хотим этого согласия достичь.
As for the interstate cooperations on international forums like the United Nations or between the governments, we need to be guided by the results that we want to get and by the wish to agree upon something substantial.
Я бы так ответил на ваш вопрос.
So that is my answer to your question.
I'm sure we get back to this during the discussion. Let me introduce our next panelist, Sorin Ducaru, is it right? Yes. Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges. Sorin, maybe you can give us your take on what NATO is doing in the field of cyber, and how do you try to find a legal and military framework for all that?
Well, thank you very much, and it's great to be here in Israel, leveraging two valued partnership of NATO, that with Israel and that with the Munich Security Conference. And let me start with giving you an evaluation of the threat landscape we face. And I think in general terms we could say that we are indeed facing the most complex and concerning threat landscape in a generation, and cyber threats are pretty much on the top of the list. I should also mention that NATO is an organization that is generally preparing to be able to respond to conflict or to aggression, but frankly it has been at its best in preventing attacks. The truth is that in cyberspace we are under attack as we speak, as Wolfgang Ischiger mentioned. It might be not above the threshold of armed attack, but still we're definitely not in the kind of pure peace context. In order to make a point where NATO is in addressing cyber aspects, and also in link with the theme of this panel, the updating of grand strategies, let me highlight what I think it's key to have such a kind of grand strategy update. I think number one, it's important to understand how cyber challenges conventional approaches to international relations, interstate relations. It's a need to close the cognitive gap and bridge technical knowledge with high-level strategic and political knowledge. Secondly, I think we need to prioritize prevention and resilience and have built-in security. And this should be done through building capacity, but also developing a normative, continuing to developing normative framework. Thirdly, it's important to build trusted partnerships and relationships through information exchange, best practices exchange, threat assessment, also on technology trends. And last but not least, try to link this context with the broader theme of defense and deterrence. I think when we want to understand the specificities of the cyber domain, I frankly think it's a bit of a trap if we want to link it necessarily to the nuclear domain. There are a lot of differences. Nuclear capabilities, we know what clear effects they have. It's not so much in the cyber domain. There's a much broader spectrum of capabilities of weapons, if you want. Usually cyber capabilities are not transparent, so they're difficult to use as deterrent because you cannot show them off. Not being able to show them off, you cannot use them. It is true that cyber is affecting our way of life. It's at the core of our way of life, our societies, very much, and influences our area. We can speak about the cyber area, but there are many differences. I think speaking about the specificity of the cyber domain, I want to highlight some aspects like the speed of evolution, the aspects related to anonymity and deniability, which favor action with impunity. Also, this linked with difficulty of attribution or prosecution. The fact that they're not just a state actor involved, it's the ability also of non-state actor that generates a lot of impact. I think it's important to have in mind how much impact the cyber attacks have on civilians and on business. Also with the fact that we have an immature or not fully developed normative framework, and it's difficult to relate the existing international framework on arms control or verification to cyber. NATO has addressed cyber challenge in an evolutionary manner. Initially, a decade before, we were addressing it as a purely technical issue. It was then that we established a computer incident response center, but it was after the attacks against Estonia a decade ago that NATO decided to address cyber as a policy issue. And since then, we had 3 policy updates. The first policy was in 2008 and established the principles of how to address cyber and the division of responsibilities with a focus between NATO as an organization's role and then national role. Then in the next policy of 2011, we have put emphasis on also development of cyber defense capability targets for allies under NATO's defense planning process, and the establishment of a centralized protection of NATO networks across currently 60 or more sites. And then in 2014, cyber defense has been linked with the reason of being of NATO to collective defense, while at the same time recognizing the applicability of international law in cyberspace, because we wanted to send a message of not having this space as an ungoverned space. We wanted to send a message of prioritizing prevention. And last but not least, also in 2014, we established, put a strong emphasis on developing our partnerships with partner nations based on trust and mutual interest, with international organizations like UN, OEC, EU, and also with industry and academia. I should mention that in cyberspace, like in the other domains, NATO's mandate is a defensive mandate, and NATO acts in line with this mandate and with international law. NATO as an organization does not acquire or develop other capabilities than defensive capabilities, and would not provide through the defense planning process any capability targets for nations and developing other capabilities than defensive. But of course, nations are sovereign and develop a broad range of capabilities themselves. The Final aspect that I wanted to highlight is that in linking cyber defense to NATO's core task of collective defense, I think we had an important strategic upgrade. Of course, this is very much relevant for high-end attacks. Those attacks that we know would reach a threshold of armed attack, where effects would be comparable with significant effects of conventional attacks. And then it would be in tune with Article 51 of the UN Charter and Article 5 of NATO to address this aspect. Now, this is not, and this is never triggered by automatically by any threshold. This is always a political decision based on an analysis in a specific context. Frankly, the first and only time Article 5 was ever really decided was after 9/11, which was a scenario that was not envisaged by the founding fathers. So I think it's important to have this in mind, as well as the fact that at the heart of our work is strengthening the defense and resilience both of NATO networks and that of allies. It was in this context that at the last summit in Warsaw, NATO adopted a cyber defense pledge at the level of head of state and government to prioritize investment in cyber security and defense, while at the same time recognizing cyberspace as an operational domain, and the fact that in this space NATO might need to operate to achieve the objectives of its missions under the assumption that it will need to operate in a heavily contested and potentially degraded cyber environment. I will stop here. I will be ready to respond to any further questions, but I think these were the key points that I wanted to highlight in my opening remarks.
Thank you. Frédéric Douzet is with us, professor at the French Institute of Geopolitics. Frédéric, there have been mentioned several times here this morning that there should be some kind of framework. I have seen that the CEO of Deutsche Telekom just recently gave an interview and said again that the ban of international landmines, for example, could be serve as an example, and that there is a necessity for security in the cyberspace for a digitalized world and a digitalized economy. For me, it sounded like a good idea.
Well, I think it's always a good idea to look for ideas for new frameworks in order to decrease the danger of this environment, because it's really unsafe. So there have been a lot of ideas in the air, and I think we need to do some research to see what legal regime, for example, could inspire us to try to elaborate some new norms and rules of responsible behavior in cyberspace. So I don't think that one single idea or regime could be exactly imposed on cyberspace. I think it always requires a number of adjustments, but we definitely need to find solutions. And I think what's important in trying to elaborate these solutions or update our grand strategy is to really know what we want to protect ourselves from. And you mentioned that we both wanted to protect our homeland, but we wanted to protect the internet itself, which I really agree with. But even when you say that we want to protect our homeland, I think we're sort of caught in a security dilemma here. Because on the one hand, there's this perception of cyber threats as being a sort of new challenge. The type of threat like we're observing right now with the attack that's the current attack that we're undergoing, or WannaCry, that we are at risk of some kind of systemic risk of threat that could bring down a lot of countries, and it's a type of threat that we can compare to climate change or to pandemics or to terrorist attacks that can spread very fast, that can have a major and disastrous impact, that can be very complex and very hard to stop, and that can be started by individual criminal organizations or any kind of groups or even terrorist organizations. And when you perceive the threat this way, then it really pulls us into the direction of international cooperation, information sharing, and the trust that we get is really based on shared interest, because it's in nobody's interest that planes fall down or that all the businesses get contaminated by a threat. So the ultimate goal is global stability. But then we have these other perceptions that seem to be dominating right now the debates, which is that cyber threat is another traditional geopolitical threat because nations use cyber means to continue to do what they've always done, meaning intelligence, meaning sabotage, espionage, all kinds of activities. And there you're typically, I mean, if you want to understand what's going on, you need to look at the geopolitical context, because it's the same motivations, political motivations, and that pulls into the exact opposite direction, which is that it's considered as an exclusive sovereign domain, and that you need to reinforce your own capabilities and limit information sharing because you need greater sovereign protection. And of course, what further complicates these discussions is that the two categories overlap, especially when you have hackers, sometimes belonging to organized crimes that are being used by states as proxies. So I think the question about our grand strategy is, what do we want to protect our countries from? Do we want to protect our countries from systemic risk to avoid what's going on at this present moment, which requires a high level of cooperation and information sharing between governments, but also sometimes it's harder to do within governments, between different agencies, and between governments and the private sector? Or do we want to protect our countries from other countries? And then, if that's the ultimate goal, then the concept of deterrence, I agree with Ambassador De Caro, needs to be revisited, because nuclear deterrence doesn't really work well in this environment. Or do we want to protect our countries from ourselves sometimes? Because state offensive actions can generate great vulnerabilities, a lot of cyber instability, and can even impede our ability to fight cyber crimes. And Jim Lewis reminded us yesterday that states are probably the most dangerous actors in cyberspace. States can launch the most sophisticated attack, and you've mentioned in your introduction that the ongoing attack is a result of an exploit from the NSA. So I think we're in this dilemma, and it's very similar to the gun control debate, I think, where, you know, we need more guns because the world is dangerous, but the more guns that are out there, then the more dangerous the world is becoming. So I know that whenever you bring up that argument, you're accused of being kind of naive, but I think we should really look into the direction of how can we minimize the systemic risk, whatever states are doing. I mean, can there be a research? Is there a way to maybe think in terms of how can we launch attacks that cannot be reused, or self-destroying code? Does that exist? Is that something we should envision? Or do we have to wait until we have a major catastrophe before we start thinking that maybe we should give up some of the aggressive activities that are going on in cyberspace? And the last point I wanted to bring is that, well, right now we're in a situation where you hear more and more states that are bragging about developing offensive capabilities, and that seems to be the actual trend. And we've also heard yesterday that the discussions at the GGE were actually not making a lot of progress, which was kind of a little depressing. So the question is whether this issue should be left to states alone or how much we should have an involvement of the academic community and the private sector into these discussions, because unlike other domains, we really are in a shared environment between governments, the military, but also civil society and businesses, and all these other actors that are using the same networks and the same technology and are clearly strongly impacted by state actions, do have a vested interest in cyber stability, but they also have the skills, the resources, the data, and a historical legitimacy to get involved in this domain because it was built by the academic community and developed by the private sector. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And we have another panelist who comes from our host country, Tel Goldstein.
Hello.
Hi. It's a chief strategist, Israel National Cyber Directorate at the Prime Minister's office. We don't have somebody at the Chancellor's office doing that? No, I don't think so. So let me ask you, President Obama, during his last visit to Berlin, I have to say during his last visit when he was a president, because he's already a regular visitor to Germany, has warned again that we could see a real arms race in the cyberspace or a continuing low-level conflict. Have you thought about, in your capacity or with your colleagues, what really constitutes an act of war in the world of cyber?
Well, I don't think we can have a textbook answer for that. The unique nature of cyber is still something that we are trying to understand. Just for example, the full scale of threats that we are facing, scale of sophistications, a variety of motivation, different scale of damages, both in singular event or cumulative damage. If you just think, you mentioned the WannaCry event, if you look at a specific attack, this is nothing. If you think of the cumulative damage, then this is something that brings it up to the national level. And I think that my first and most important note here is that it will be a mistake from the strategic point of view to separate between all of those questions that we are asking today about issues of warfare, use of force, and the more domestic issues of national cybersecurity, which is a relatively new field that we are trying to develop. And if, again, back to the WannaCry example, if you build the right robustness in your network and the resilience in the national level of how to contain this kind of event easily on a day-to-day basis, then your ability to face the more threatening, dangerous attack will be much better. Our ability to develop the way of thinking on how to deal with those attacks once we don't have to deal all day long with so many attacks will be much better. And therefore, I think we must develop this kind of the grand strategy from within our thinking of our national cybersecurity. And this brings me to the second note, that we must build the right mechanism to engage this issue, all variety issue of cybersecurity, and develop new kind of thinking. And I believe this was the main issue that was in the head of the Prime Minister when he, exactly 6 years ago, announced in this conference the establishment of the Bureau. It was not because he was worried about our critical infrastructures, because we had more than 10 years involvement in securing our most critical infrastructure. It was because he and the government realized that we must have a more strategic approach on how a nation secure itself, all a variety of efforts. And I think that we must build it a new discipline, looking at all issues together.
That sounds very interesting. So I've heard a lot of food for thought here this morning. And with that, I would open up to the audience, the participants, for questions and comments. If you identify yourself shortly, this would be great. Oh, Oleg, again, sorry.
Я ответил на ваш вопрос. А теперь хотел бы ответить на вопросы мой, если вы позволите.
I have answered your question, and now I'd like to answer a question of many people present here, if you please.
Ladies and gentlemen, Russians love their own language. That's why I'll read my Russian text, okay? But I have interpreter, and she will try to translate my speech correctly, if you don't mind much. Yes.
We take all short speeches here.
Уважаемые дамы и господа,
Ladies and gentlemen,
деятельность каждого государства по обеспечению его информационной безопасности определяется принятыми в нем стратегиями, доктринами и законами.
a state's information security policy is defined by its strategies, doctrines, and laws.
В России система официальных взглядов на обеспечение национальной безопасности Российской Федерации в информационной сфере представлена доктриной информационной безопасности, которая утверждена нашим президентом в декабре прошлого года.
Russia's official national security policy governing information space is enshrined in the Information Security Doctrine signed by Russian President last December.
В документе дан подробный анализ новых вызовов и угроз в информационной сфере и определены приоритетные направления обеспечения информационной безопасности.
The document provides for a thorough analysis of new information security challenges and threats and outlines information security priorities.
Это не закрытый документ, вы имели возможность с ним ознакомиться.
Well, it's a public document and you had an opportunity to read it.
Ну, позволю немножко напомнить. Трансграничный характер угроз информационной безопасности на фоне лавинообразного роста использования ИКТ в противоправных целях наглядно показывает необходимость консолидации усилий в борьбе с этими угрозами.
I would like to stress that information security threats have become transnational and coupled with rapidly increasing ICT misuse, it clearly points to the need to consolidate our efforts to overcome these threats.
Здесь присутствуют в большинстве люди, которые знакомы с историей вопроса.
Here are present many scholars and individuals who are very well versed in the history of this issue.
Но хочу напомнить, еще 19 лет назад, в 1998 году, на сессии Генеральной Ассамблеи Организации Объединенных Наций Россия представила проект резолюции, в котором обращала внимание всего мирового сообщества на вызовы и угрозы в информационной сфере.
But I would like to remind you that 19 years ago, in the autumn of 1998, Russia submitted a draft resolution to the United Nations General Assembly wishing to draw the international community's attention to information security challenges and threats.
Россия уже тогда призывала объединить усилия для противодействия использованию информационно-коммуникационных технологий в противоправных, военно-политических, террористических и иных преступных целях, так называемая триада угроз.
It was back then when Russia called on the global community to unite efforts to counteract the use of ICT for illegal purposes, namely political, military, terrorist and other criminal purposes. This is a so-called triad of threats.
Однако этот призыв не был услышан.
Yet that call fell on deaf ears.
Наши подходы подверглись критике со стороны ряда ведущих западных государств.
Our approaches were criticized by a number of leading Western countries.
Позволю себе сказать, что эксперты и политики утонули в многолетних бесплодных дискуссиях, в которых объективность оценки ситуации подменялась идеологическими установками.
The experts and politicians got embroiled in years-long fruitless debates when impartiality was substituted by ideology.
И за этими баталиями было потеряно главное – время.
And the most precious thing, time, was lost to those squabbles.
Наше бездействие только играло на руку террористам, экстремистам, преступному сообществу, методы, способы и средства деятельности которых становились все масштабнее и изощреннее.
Our inactivity played into the hands of terrorists, extremists and criminals whose methods, tools and means became increasingly more large-scale and sophisticated.
Только спустя 12 лет, в 2010 году, в докладе группы правительственных экспертов ООН по достижениям в сфере информатизации и телекоммуникаций в контексте международной безопасности была зафиксирована упомянутая триада угроз.
Only 12 years later, in 2010, the United Nations group of governmental experts on developments in the field of information and telecommunications in the context of international security, in its report, highlighted the aforementioned triad of threats.
Мы полагали, что единое понимание проблемы станет отправной точкой в поступательном движении на пути формирования системы международной информационной безопасности.
We believed that a shared vision of the problem would become a starting point on a progressive way to create an international information security system.
Очевидно, что построение такой системы – единственный адекватный ответ нарастающим вызовам и угрозам в информационной сфере.
It is obvious that such a system is the only appropriate response to increasing cyber challenges and threats.
Первым шагом стало внесение государствами-членами Шанхайской организации сотрудничества в сентябре 2011 года в качестве официального документа 66-й сессии Генассамблеи ООН правил поведения в области обеспечения международной информационной безопасности.
Shanghai Cooperation Organization member states took the first step in September of 2011 by drafting the International Code of Conduct for Information Security that was circulated as an official document of the 66th session of the United Nations General Assembly.
Но данная инициатива не была поддержана западными партнерами.
However, our Western partners didn't support this initiative.
Вновь было потеряно время, которое, как известно, деньги, которые нам придется за утраченное время потом вкладывать, столь необходимое для организации взаимодействия на этом направлении.
Time, which is money, and time, which is vitally important to establish cooperation in this area, was lost again.
Однако динамичное развитие информационной сферы, стремительные темпы развития информационно-коммуникационных технологий и масштабы их противоправного использования вынудили повернуться к обозначенным проблемам лицом спустя 2 года.
Yet, given the information environment dynamics, rapid ICT development, and the scope of ICT misuse, 2 years later, we had to bring up the same issue.
В 2013 году в докладе группы правительственных экспертов ООН были сформулированы результаты исследования норм, правил или принципов ответственного поведения государств в информационном пространстве.
In 2013, the United Nations group of governmental experts, having studied norms, rules and principles of responsible behavior by states in information space, published the results of the study.
В докладе нового состава группы в 2015 году эти положения были подтверждены. Однако все упомянутые вопросы, нормы и правила оставались лишь результатом исследования экспертов. Обязательной и даже рекомендательной силы они не имели.
In 2015, the new panel of experts confirmed those results. However, these norms and rules were not even recommendatory, let alone binding.
Жизнь диктовала свои условия. Россия и ее партнеры предложили выработать в 2016-2017 годах в рамках группы правительственных экспертов ООН доклад основу которого составили бы правила ответственного поведения государств в информационном пространстве в контексте международной безопасности. Конечным результатом работы группы могло бы стать внесение предложения о принятии Генеральной Ассамблеей ООН резолюции, закрепляющей эти правила. Это основополагающий момент с точки зрения международно-правового регулирования этого вопроса.
Yet life took its course, and Russia and its partners proposed that in 2016 to 2017, the United Nations group of governmental experts drafts a report based on the code of responsible state behavior in information space in the context of international security. And the outcome of this group's work could be a proposition to adopt a United Nations General Assembly resolution enshrining this code, which would be vital for establishing an international legal framework in this area.
Однако эта инициатива, нашедшая поддержку многих членов группы, кстати, отсутствующих здесь на этом мероприятии, представителей Китая, других стран, которые заявляют все более активно о своем месте в обсуждениях и в урегулировании международно-правовых вопросов, связанных в целом с интернетом и информационно-коммуникационными технологиями.
However, this initiative, though supported by many group members,
Oleg, I doubled the time for Russia already.
Вчера регламент был тоже в определенной степени превышен.
No.
yesterday you have doubled the time for other speakers.
И потом вы же хотите услышать позицию Российской Федерации.
And after all, you would like to hear the official stance of Russia on this issue.
Thank you. Мы по-прежнему считаем, что необходимо объединить усилия мирового сообщества в борьбе с этим злом.
And we still believe that the international community should ramp up its efforts to overcome those threats.
Потому что не имеем права быть пассивными созерцателями, не имеем права смириться с нарастающими вызовами и угрозами в информационной сфере.
Because we have no right to be passive contemplators, and we have no right to put up with increasing information security challenges and threats.
Наши подходы в отношении упомянутых правил поведения основываются на следующих постулатах, принципах.
Russia's vision on the aforementioned rules of conduct are based on the following.
Во-первых, информационно-коммуникационные технологии должны использоваться исключительно в мирных целях. Международное сотрудничество должно быть нацелено на предотвращение конфликтов в сфере использования КТ, а не на их регулировании.
Firstly, ICT must be used only for peaceful purposes, and the aim of international cooperation...
We really have to stop it here, please. Otherwise we have no space for a discussion. Maybe you can make the last points during the discussion. Would this work?
Я не могу препятствовать вашему желанию.
Если
не интересны наши позиции, я могу здесь остановиться, но у меня здесь буквально еще пара минут.
If you're not interested in our stance on this issue, I can stop here, but I need maybe a couple of more minutes.
Everybody is interested in your position and in Russia's position, but we try to establish rules here, which means 3 to 5 minutes for every panelist, so that we have time to discuss with the audience. So I will really urge you to cut it short. Maybe you have 1 or 2 more thoughts, and then we open up for the discussion here, please.
Я сейчас быстро расскажу.
Пожалуйста.
I'll try to be brief.
Главное. Государства должны обладать суверенитетом над информационно-телекоммуникационной инфраструктурой на своей территории. В противном случае мы будем погружены только в дискуссии.
States should have sovereignty over ICT infrastructure on their territory, otherwise we will be only engaged in fruitless discussions.
Суверенитет, между прочим, предполагает ответственность суверена перед другими суверенами за то, что происходит на его территории.
Sovereignty means the responsibility of the individual holding sovereignty before other sovereigns having the same responsibilities.
Поэтому государства не должны допускать возможности использовать свою территорию для осуществления компьютерных атак.
That's why states shouldn't let their territories to be used for perpetrations of cyber attacks.
должны бороться с внедрением и использованием скрытых вредоносных функций и программных уязвимостей.
States should counteract embedding and use of hidden malicious functions and software vulnerabilities,
И добиваться ее безопасности для пользования.
and to ensure its safety for the users.
И любые обвинения в адрес государств в причастности к компьютерным атакам должны быть обоснованными и доказанными.
And any accusations of state involvement in cyber attacks must be well-founded, substantiated and proved.
На этой основе и должны разрабатываться международно-правовые и двусторонние связи и договора, которые позволят решить вопрос по существу. Спасибо большое.
That is, we believe, is the base for international cooperation, for international legal framework, and for bilateral agreements in this area.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. You have heard a lot about the working group at the United Nations. I think we will hear much more about it because the recent head of the group, the German diplomat Carsten Geier, is with us. Hey.
I'm not sure if this... Thank you so much. Yes, and thank you for giving me the floor. And I'm speaking actually under the control of my colleagues from the Netherlands and from Russia, Carmen Gonzalez and Andrei Krutsky. So whatever I say may be corrected by them. But I'd just like to make two quick points. The first point is there was the argument made that the GGE had not made a lot of progress. And that is actually a misconception. The GGE, this past GGE, made a lot of progress on the most important part of its mandates pertaining to existing potential threats to capacity building, to confidence building, to non-binding norms, rules and principles, and actually also on aspects of how international law applies to the use of ICT by states. So where we did fail to reach a consensus so far is only on certain aspects of international law. So a lot of progress has been made, and the High Representative of the United Nations for Disarmament has actually asked me to investigate how to retain that progress. The proceedings of the group have not been formally closed, and this opens a variety of avenues which we're currently exploring. The other point I'd just like to make is that the group did explore a wide variety of proposals. Actually, we encouraged every expert, we had 25 experts on the group, to present position papers and proposals in writing. We defined questions to which they all answered in writing. So we had a wide variety of proposals that we discussed in detail, maybe too wide, but discussions went way beyond just a single aspect. Just wanted to make that point, and I'll be very happy to discuss more about that this afternoon. Thank you.
I'm sure we are all looking forward to hear more about the process at the United Nations. Wolfgang, you had a comment or a question? Why don't you...
I want to try to just insert a point of urgency and into this discussion and urge the panel not to appear too complacent. If the belief here is that we are waiting for some catastrophic event until we wake up, my question to you is, have we not already had significant and important catastrophic events? I will just list two. Oleg, let's just assume for purposes of this debate that the US reports about Russian meddling in US election campaigns is more or less correct. Let's assume that for purposes of the discussion. If that is correct, the result, of course, is, in terms of global politics, a real catastrophe, because the relationship between the Russian Federation and the United States is now at an all-time low. You guys don't even talk to each other. Hopefully there will be a Trump-Putin meeting in Hamburg in a few days, but expectations from the international community as to the development of the Russian-American relationship are at zero, at a very low point. So catastrophe, political catastrophe has already occurred. Second point, I'd be interested in the view of the panel. I think the international community, our governments, collectively, including at the United Nations, demonstrate an enormous sense of total helplessness. We are facing, now for the second time in a short period of time, this massive attack, destroying lots of wealth. I mean, the WannaCry and the more recent attack, and this surely will be followed by others. Are we aware that we are currently living at a moment where your government and the French government, my own government, the US government, we are losing the control over the application of force because we're not sufficiently in control of what non-state actors are doing out there. And they can, without impunity, continue this stuff. Where is the decision-making capability of the international community to take charge, get your act together, and do something about it? So let's not be too complacent about this. This is very, very serious stuff for the future of the international community at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wolfgang. And thank you for raising the Russia-America question again so elegantly. So I parse Wolfgang's comments and questions to the panel. Frederick, you want to go first?
Yes, I just wanted to react and also apologize to Carsten. I was looking for the right word to express the frustration for the fact that the GG did not reach a consensus as planned. But I'm hoping you're going to make progress. As far as the situation now, whether we would call it a political catastrophe, that's an interesting concept. I guess what I was referring to with catastrophe is some kind of a systemic attack that could cause death or bring down economies or have consequences that would really hurt all our societies. And although we can judge whether this situation right now is a catastrophe or not, I think that the election process was maybe influenced by some fake news and some attacks, but that's not the only factor that was important in that dynamic. And I also believe that the present tensions, you have strong geopolitical underpinnings, and it's not just about cyber, it's about a more global geopolitical context. So I think with all these cyber issues, we always have to be careful to put them back into their geopolitical context, because there are reasons why these tensions occur, and everything that happens in cyber is the result of what people do for the same old political motivations. But I don't think I'm being complacent by thinking that we really need to weigh the risks of what states are doing in terms of aggressive behavior and attacks, because I don't think we control absolutely all the consequences of what states do, and it can have adverse consequences. And I think the current attack is an unintended consequence of an NSA exploit. I'm not even going into the whole issue of responsibility or liability. I'm just saying that it's a direct consequence of an exploit that was created. So I think in order to discuss our strategies, need to prioritize what we care most about, and whether it is to consider this systemic risk, or whether it is to have efficient tools to defend our countries.
Well, but you said you don't want to go into these debate. I have one quick question for you. I have seen a lot of cyber experts coming out just yesterday and today saying that if the intelligence service of a state developed such a powerful weapon and then it got stolen and used by an adversary, that there is a necessity that the state who has developed this weapon will help those who are affected by it. Do you agree?
Well, there is definitely a huge blame game going on, and we saw it during the WannaCry attack as well. So it depends. If you're talking about a moral responsibility, then maybe I can discuss that. If you're talking about a legal responsibility, I'm not a legal expert, so I certainly
And what about the moral dimension?
Well, I think the moral responsibility is everybody's in order to try to stop this attack, including individuals, including the private sector. I think everybody should be involved in trying to stopping this widespread attack. Okay. But I think the issue of responsibility and liability is very interesting because you're also seeing companies that are a victim of major cyber attacks that are politically motivated because there are easier targets than critical infrastructure, and we don't really have thought through also all the consequences in terms of then who's responsible, who should pay for the damage in that kind of situation.
Sorry.
Yes, if I may, to follow up immediately after Carsten Geier's point, I think we can definitely not underscore the huge preventive and stabilizing role of the development of norms, confidence building measures in cyberspace. And well, NATO, while not being a norm-setting organization, by no means, we committed to not just to follow those norms, but be in support of this process and actually act in accordance with these norms as an organization. I think what is important is to have what is called the affirmative action of states in implementing these norms, and also, whenever necessary, actually pointing to the fact when they're not respected. It's true, they are voluntary norms, so you cannot, let's say, sanction. We don't have a sanctions process, but I think, especially states, they care about reputation, and I think we should consider this reputational effect. So again, it's important to have to support this effort. And this is why NATO is developing this relationship of cooperation both with the UN, with OEC, and with EU. It's even closer. It's a structural relationship. Secondly, let me underscore once more why it is important to be really also focusing on the basics and the basics of cyber hygiene and cyber security, because as is known, the vast majority, 90% of the effects of attack could be prevented through such measures. So let's not underscore this, and this is valid also for the WannaCry. It's valid also for what happened against UK Parliament, where there were attackers guessing passwords and so on. So simple things like that, how to have strong authentications and other aspects, and then of course. When it comes to the difficulty is how to establish a set of responses that would be in the context of attacks below the threshold of armed attack. Above the threshold, for NATO it's clear, it's Article 5, and by the way, there's no assumption that any response to an attack which is equivalent with an armed attack should be only with cyber means. It could be with other means, including military. But below the threshold, it's a more complex issue. And I know there are efforts, both at the EU, they're thinking about having a diplomatic toolbox to respond to this. We're also looking at how our crisis response process in NATO could be adapted to this. But again, here the existence of norms and the applicability of international law can help, and I want to underscore the product of the Center of Excellence on Cyber Defense in Tallinn this year, the Tallinn Manual, which is not an international agreement. It has not been endorsed politically by nations, not by NATO or the EU, but it's a very valuable product of scholars that would guide us in the applicability of international law in the context of cyber attack, both below and above the threshold of armed attack.
Thank you. Janet?
Thank you. So I would first suggest that we are not demonstrating any complacency. We treat this with the utmost urgency, and I think from the United States perspective, we've demonstrated our commitment to network defense largely through my organization and how we have built my organization in a way that enables us to partner with the private sector in a way that isn't usually done within governments. We are able to have protected conversations. We can share information in a way that protects privacy and civil liberties. And we can do this in an automated way. We can exchange analysts and share technical expertise, both in a steady state situation and incident response. And importantly, what we've also learned over the years is, clearly we cannot just do this defense within our domestic constructs. Not only are many of our companies multinational companies, but we also depend on our international partners, both for information that they may have, technical information or otherwise, but also so that we can all be working together to raise the cyber hygiene, as my colleague discussed, of our critical infrastructure, both domestically and around the world. And so that's where we've very much focused on. I've spoken before about how WannaCry response in particular was a very clarifying moment for us in the importance of the international community, particularly the importance of the connections of our CERTs or CSERTs, Computer Security Incident Response Teams. My organization houses the United States CERT, and that's where we have private sector companies and representatives from critical infrastructure that sit on our watch floor with us. And we are able to have both classified and unclassified conversations. And we're able to now that we have countries throughout the world that have developed similar capabilities, we're now able to extend that communications, both again in an automated way and sort of broader conversations with countries throughout the world. And those capabilities need to be strengthened. Those protocols and those communication processes need to be strengthened. But I would submit that is where the heart of our international cooperation, both in a steady state and in incident response for network defense purposes. That's not to suggest that there aren't very important efforts going on that we need to continue to support around diplomacy and norms and research and development and how we take on some of these really difficult challenges. But from my perspective, this is a new and exciting area for us to all be cooperating and both protecting domestically as well as internationally.
Jeanette, let me add one question. I assume I will not get an answer because it's probably classified. But if you're talking about cooperating with a lot of partners, the question I'm hearing is, what else is out there? What else got stolen? So which weapon will we see next? Can you talk to your partners and tell them, what will be next? Well, I think you could go both and answer the question.
I would say that no, I can't predict what's going to be next. We do have conversations with our international partners, and we both benefit from information that we have. But it is for those of you, particularly in the business of trying to predict what is next, it's largely impossible. So we focus on understanding what vulnerabilities are out there, working very hard to encourage patching those, in particular those critical vulnerabilities, reducing the time to patch, focusing on the safety of devices that are connected to the internet, and so that's what our focus is on.
Thanks. Oleg.
Thank you. Но прежде всего нет никакой трагедии.
First of all, we're not talking about any kind of tragedy.
Прошло 25 лет после того, как Россия перенесла трагедию. Об этом не надо забывать.
It's been 25 years since Russia suffered a tragedy.
И вот теперь, когда все были спокойны, оказалось, что Россия стала такой, какой была, и в этом трагедия? В этом нет трагедии. Нужно договариваться.
So now Russia is as strong as it used to be, and that is no tragedy. We need to cooperate and negotiate.
Второй вопрос. Русские не лишились языка, хотя говорят на своем родном.
And the second aspect, Russians still have the tongue, though they prefer to speak Russian tongue.
И уж точно мы сможем поговорить с американцами.
And we are capable of speaking to the United States.
Когда у них закончится их собственный процесс выяснения отношений, тогда, как и говорил наш президент, мы обязательно будем разговаривать. И будем это делать совершенно прагматично и профессионально.
When they sort out their business, domestic business, we will be able to establish a dialogue, and we will remain professional, as our president says.
Нельзя дальше заигрываться.
We should stop playing games.
Что такое Даиш? Это группировка, которая хочет стать государством. Вот где вопрос. И они используют все возможности для того, чтобы таковой стать. Мы должны им позволить это сделать или нет? Наверное, нет.
What is ISIS? It's a terrorist group that wants to become a state, and they have all the means to do that. Should we let them do that? I think no.
Если государство обладает государственной властью, которую делегировал ему его собственный народ, оно, это государство, должно этим правом воспользоваться.
If a state has a state power given by the people of this nation, then the state has to capitalize on it.
И если крупнейшая корпорация, одна, вторая, третья, зарабатывает миллиарды, а может и больше, в долларах США на проблеме информационной системы, которая идет во всем мире, то вопрос должен быть адресован и к государству, на территории которого они работают, и к ним самим, чтобы они соблюдали те правила и требования, которые необходимы в нормальном человеческом обществе.
And if a leading corporation is gaining billions, tackling the issues of information system, then we should ask them to comply with the existing rules, and we should ask their state, the state where they belong, where they are located, to comply with the rules.
Мы много говорим о профилактике. Нужно понимать, что государство либо контролирует ситуацию на своей территории, либо нет.
We talk a lot about prevention, but we need to understand that the government either has control over the situation domestically or it hasn't.
Если государство будет правильно контролировать, не будет проблем и не будет нового оружия, которое будет возникать бесконтрольно для всех остальных.
If the government regulates it efficiently, that there will be no weapon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I understood we have an invitation for lunch from the German government, but this is another 15 minutes. So we have one more round of questions or comments here. In the back, yeah. There in the back, on the left, please.
Hi everyone, Shachar from Checkmarks, a local company in the field of application security. It's a privilege to speak to NATO here in this stage. Question, you mentioned a lot of times that you focus on defense systems and not anything more progressive. Do you think the approach is correct when if you do offer offensive tools, it might even eliminate aggression by bad people?
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned, NATO as the organization, as an organization, is resilience focused, and it develops capabilities on the defensive side, even though I would say they are quite advanced analytics, forensics tools, and so on. And it does not provide targets or benchmarks for nations to develop any other capabilities than in the cyber other than defensive. On the other hand, nations, allied nations, are sovereign nations, and thus they develop whatever capability they considered necessary to fulfill their defensive mandate. So, like in other domains, allies develop this broad range of capabilities. And like in other domains, in cyberspace, also NATO relies on a broad range of allied capabilities to fulfill its defensive mandate. So I think it's important to have this clarity. And it's also important to highlight that whatever NATO does is in line with the defensive mandate, and while also adhering and abiding by its obligations under international law. From this point of view, I wouldn't say it's so much different than defense in general. I think we are at a time where we need to address this cross-domain approach in our defense. And frankly, when we try to link this cyberspace to the complex concept of deterrence, I think the only way to address it is also through a cross-domain approach. It's not like a tit for tat and so on, especially since the applicability of cyber-only capabilities for deterrence is difficult. So having such a cross-domain approach, which is also one of the questions raised before this panel, is the approach to go.
Please.
My name is Atsushi Kaimura from NISC, Japanese Cyber Agency. I have a question about the cyber hygiene, which Ms. Mafla mentioned. Yes, we NISC think that in the situation of observing the situation of the WannaCry attack and the Mirai's botnet attacks, the conventional approach of information security, cyber security, is not good enough. I think that's enhancement of the capability and the awareness of all stakeholders are important. And so I would like to ask, how should we approach the cyber hygiene to minimize the systematic risks with observing the expansion of the IoT and with seeing the obsolete systems around the world. So it is great if you can see about your views.
See? Cooperating. So you said the conventional approach to cyber hygiene is not sufficient. Assuming you mean just sort of the way our current approach maybe you can clarify that a little bit.
I think I'm saying that the conventional approach of cybersecurity is led only by the cyber experts. Enhancement of all stakeholders from the individual level, it is necessary, we think. So the cyber hygiene is a key point to minimize the systemic risk of whole the cyber space. So that is why I'd like to know about how the panelists are seeing the views of cyber hygiene.
So I would say, as Frederic mentioned, and as we've put out in our cybersecurity framework, other countries have looked at similar, is you need to identify that which is most important to you. I think what a lot of organizations struggle with and individuals struggle with is the plethora of information now around different ways to secure their systems and how do they do that. And they're not necessarily doing that in a prioritized way and doing it in a risk management way. We know how to manage risk in organizations, and we need to have organizations take cyber and incorporate that into their risk management processes. And then allocate resources accordingly. I do think that there is, in the United States, we're still working through this. What does it mean to have an appropriate level of cyber hygiene? What does that actually look like? And the cybersecurity framework right now is what we are encouraging organizations to adopt, both businesses and government. We're going through a process of updating that. There are a lot of standards out there. There should be more, I think, some more international standards, particularly in the control systems community. I think the consumer or the user is one that we really need to focus on. There's such a vulnerability, and so much security is dependent on the user making appropriate security choices. And I know there's a lot of great research going on in how do we lessen that vulnerability, and we're not so dependent on the user making those difficult security choices, and we want to continue to support that. But I do think, and again, we in the United States, and I know a lot of other countries are looking at that, is what does it mean to have that appropriate level of cyber hygiene? Now that gets complicated because then you're starting to talk about liability and what does that mean and how do you prove that, and you start to talk about compliance regimes. And we don't want to stymie innovation, and we want to encourage risk management choices and allow the flexibility for an organization or individual to make that, and not have a regulatory regime that dictates that or forces compliance. But I think that the approach we have now is the only one that can work given all of those factors, and but that we need to, in particular, really look at the users and the manufacturers now of all of the various different devices that are being connected to the internet, help them understand the risk that they are taking on and how they can appropriately mitigate those risks. And also, our major focus is understanding those essential services and functions that represent systemic risk, and how are we prioritizing the protection of those assets, both domestically and globally.
My name's Paul Toomey. I have a background both as head of 2 government agencies in Australia, but I was also one of the founding figures and the CEO of ICANN, so a multi-stakeholder body. I want to follow up from that last dialogue, and I've got a question, then I'll make an observation to inform the question. The question I have to the panelists is, do you think your governments can move away from a pure national security analysis approach to address the dichotomy put forward by the French professor? And the French professor, I thought, had a very good dichotomy about the way the perception of risk is. We talk about hygiene here. You've mentioned cyber hygiene, but can you consider an environment where, just as governments have over chemicals and they have over biological weapons and germs, realise that there can be a non-state or lesser state process to look after a lot of the issues that make things safer, and then a state focused where it gets closer to weapons. So in healthcare, the state plays a role, but everybody plays a role in healthcare until you come to higher levels of risk where the state's more important. Similarly, with chemicals, since the First World War, we've done a similar sort of phenomenon. I'm always interested in cybersecurity discussions like this anywhere in the world, because when government's involved, often it comes from sort of signals intelligence down, that's been the experience. While I wonder, the dialogue we've just had is whether we ought to, we have sort of this false dichotomy. Should it be the state sovereign? Should it be other players? And I'm actually wondering whether you think the analysis could change at your governments. So it's more like your approach you take with healthcare. It's more like the approach you take with chemical weapons and chemicals generally. That you've got one approach which is clearly sovereign, but you more importantly support and challenge, which I think is what's needed, challenge the non-state actors and additional actors to get their act together in sort of the broader areas, especially that, as the French professor said, where it's a common set of risks. So that's my question.
Thank you. So we have 3 governments, 1 academic and 1 multinational organization to answer. Who wants to go first?
Well, I guess for the French, we have a brand new government, so I can tell you in a little while. What we can observe is that everybody is much younger, and there are more women than men in the government, so I'm pretty optimistic. We actually have digital natives in the government. They've been handling the whole election security issue in a very interesting way. And I just, if I can make a side comment, reflect on what Ambassador Ducaro was saying, that states care about reputations, but that doesn't tell us what reputation they care about. Sometimes they care about reputations of being very powerful. And I think to that extent, what happened during the French election was handled pretty well for the runoff. So there are signs that this is a priority. President Macron, for his victory speech, mentioned that digital issues were a top strategic priority. So they're definitely looking into that. And I know that the issue of systemic risk is very present because they're very nervous about, for example, allowing the private sector to conduct offensive activities because they worry about the systemic risk. Now, how is that going to translate into trying to solve this dilemma? I don't know yet, but I know that on the one hand, it's considered a question of sovereignty, but on the other hand, sovereignty is changing in this new world. First, we also have the notion of European sovereignty in some areas, and there's also the whole question of fighting terrorism. We're dealing with foreign platforms, so there are already issues that are dealt with that are considered a really sovereign domain in national security, but that are being handled with private sector companies. So I think things are changing. The whole notion of how we exercise sovereign powers is changing with the data revolution, and therefore it's hard to know now where this is going, but I think there is room for discussion.
Thank you. I would love to hear from all of you, but you should be a little brief. At any time of this day, I would get some extra minutes from Wolfgang, but not before lunch. So,
as I mentioned before, I think that looking on national cybersecurity from the perspective of traditional national security is definitely misguiding. And I mentioned that we developed a conceptual framework on how we believe nations should secure itself themselves, and it's not relevant just for Israel. And the first two layers are actually about the relations with the organization, with the public. So the first one is robustness, which means making sure organizations will secure themselves, whether private or public. And here the role of the government is mainly to promote and support, and it's the responsibility of the organization. The second layer is resilience, which means when we have a systemic event, when we have an event, an attack in our markets, and we'll have a systemic ability to contain it, to work together. This is the layer of cooperation between the government and the organizations to deal with an ongoing attack. And only the third layer is about the national defense, and this is the place that the government is doing all other sort of more traditional law enforcement and national security effort, but this layer is highly based on the first two, which means definitely we must build our strategic approach to cyber in a more collaborative approach between the government and the public, and between governments, which is also something that's important to remember, that in many of the cases governments are working together in the national defense. They need to work together on those issues.
If I may, I thought from the very beginning that Frédéric's very suggestive dichotomy was mainly based for intellectual and analytical structure reasons, because in reality, I think the state has a role in both addressing systemic risks, of course, in partnership with the other stakeholders, especially with industry, interest groups, NGOs, and so on, and definitely has a role to defend and protect against attacks, high-end attacks from state actors. What's interesting is that in cyber, I think there is a role for state and industry, for example, cooperation, also in defending from high-end threats. This is not saying that anything should be outsourced, like responses to industry or any other actor, but in terms of situational awareness, information exchange, we're doing this. We're doing it also in NATO, in the cyber industry partnership. We have achieved a lot through this information exchange and also through developing our training, education, and including non-state actors in our exercises, like participation of industry and academia. So there's a scope for this aspect as well. And last but not least, I will stress again the importance of bridging this cognitive gap, the knowledge gap, the whole spectrum from technical expertise to high-end strategic expertise related to the cyber threats.
Ronan, you want to take the last question? But it has to be a brief one.
It's very brief. It's for the American representative, Ms. Manfor. The United States officially accused Russia in meddling its election, in maybe influencing the results of the elections. In old-time terminology, that would be considered as declaring war on the United States and possibly assassinating the US president. So how come, if these allegations are true, then how come you still conduct dialogue with the Russians and you sit with the Russian representative on the same panel? And not encouraging you to step down, of course, a lot of respect to the Munich Security Conference. If it's not true, then of course it has other implications. But I think that the implication, the meaning of these allegations have not been translated, if they are true, into the true behavior of the United States vis-a-vis Russia, and maybe the other way around. Thank you.
I think you said it's time for lunch.
I think this...
Before lunch. Before lunch. Во-первых, никто не обвинял официально Российскую Федерацию, тем более Соединенные Штаты Америки. Мне так кажется.
First of all, as far as I know, there were no official accusations from the United States.
Если бы были официальные обвинения, мы бы здесь точно на одной панели не сидели.
If there were official accusations, indeed, we wouldn't be sitting at one panel together, certainly.
А главный вопрос перед ланчем – это то, что хотели мы, не хотели, а в вопросе компьютерной информационной безопасности мы перешли к гендерной теме.
And the last point that I would like to make that whether we wanted it or no, when tackling cybersecurity issues, we also started addressing some gender issues.
И это очень важно, что женщины играют все большую роль в нашем общественном деле. Спасибо.
And as Frederick said, it's a very good thing that women are empowered and are playing a greater role in our life. Thank you.
So we'll just say the United States has made our position clear on this issue. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can't continue to find ways to work through these issues, and that is at the heart of diplomacy. And so we, well, I won't go reiterate those positions. You can all find them publicly, but we do need to get some lunch.
Frederic, you had a last comment, I understood.
I think the answer so far has been the U.S. government pretty clear. I mean, they sort of laid out the steps of how it fit in international law, and that has definitely led to countermeasures, but not below the radar of what triggers war. So I think we're pretty clear on that so far.
It seems to me that we will get back to this subject later today. Please join me all in thanking our panelists here. And bon appetit.